Across the world, there are millions of infestations each year. The key is acting quickly and preventing future outbreaks. Because most of the time, by the time people notice, it may already be too late. In November 2025, the city of Irvine, California, issued a public nuisance notice on a single suburban property. Inside, over 1,000 rats had taken hold. They moved through the walls. They scratched through the night. They spilled into neighboring homes, completely fearless around humans. Neighbors described the property as too far gone, and that was just one house. Hazmat suits moved through the front yard while neighbors watched from behind drawn curtains, afraid of what might spill out next. The night was no longer quiet. Elaine Duncan, living next door, described the constant fear of stepping outside and finding rats in her car, on her porch, underfoot. She stopped letting her grandchildren visit. The city declared the property unlivable and sent in crews to seal every gap wider than a coin. But the rats had already moved on, pouring into neighboring homes, yards, and storm drains. The infestation bled across property lines, indifferent to fences or boundaries. Irvine's council scrambled to respond, passing emergency ordinances and allocating $150,000 for pest control. The official plan called for bait stations, steel mesh, and chemical deterrents. But for weeks, the rats simply shifted routes, finding new entry points faster than crews could seal them. The city's own records showed that even after a 3-month remediation blitz, post-inspection found activity reduced by 95%. Never 100. A single unsealed vent, a forgotten crawl space, and the whole cycle could begin again. Far from an isolated horror, Irvine's disaster echoed a larger pattern. In the Bronx, a series of NYCHA service tickets revealed a slow-motion crisis unfolding inside Longwood housing project. Starting in March, tenants filed complaint after complaint: rats running through vents, droppings in hallways, bites in the night. In June, a 1-year-old was bitten in her crib and rushed to the hospital for tetanus shots. The city's audit admitted to a systemic failure: too few crews, too many gaps in service, and a rodent population that seemed to grow faster than the response. By November, federal health officials issued a leptospirosis alert for the Bronx. The city promised $4 million for an extermination blitz, but residents remained wary, remembering how quickly the rats returned after every previous campaign. Rumors spread faster than the official updates. Viral videos claimed to show rats fighting inside radiators in Manchester Lakes or swarming through Peoria after a python escaped, but no credible reports ever surfaced. The line between fact and urban legend blurred as fear filled the information gaps left by overwhelmed agencies. In every city, the same lesson repeated. When food sources are stable and entry points are ignored, rodents do not wait for permission. The house no longer belonged to its owners. Rats announce themselves. They scratch, they chew. Spiders are different. They don't invade with noise. They multiply in silence. A single thread, almost invisible, dangled above a child's bed in suburban Sydney. At first, it seemed harmless, a stray hair, maybe lint. Then, in the pale morning of 2021, the ceiling shimmered with movement. Hundreds of spiderlings, each no bigger than a poppy seed, clustered in the corners and spilled down the walls. The family's voices, strained and tired, recalled how the webs returned each night, spun by creatures too small to spot until they moved as one. The child's room, once a refuge, became a place of constant watchfulness. Shoes were shaken, toys abandoned. The invasion was silent, relentless, and everywhere at once. In Andalusia, a family returned to their vacation home in late summer of 2025. The windows were veiled in silk. Inside, the air was thick, tinged with the scent of old shells and dust. Spiders had claimed every shelf and lamp, their egg sacs hidden behind frames and inside chair legs. The house had stood empty for months, but the colony thrived, feeding on moths and flies that slipped through a torn screen. By the time the family arrived, spiders occupied every room. The familiar home was gone, replaced by something wild and indifferent. Each step risked brushing against a web or sending a spider darting across bare skin. A single egg sac, tucked in a suitcase or corner, can seed a hidden colony. Spiders like to stay put. Bedbugs do something more disturbing. They travel with us. A suitcase rides the subway from the Bronx to Midtown. A jacket brushes the seat of a Paris taxi. Inside the seams, bedbugs wait, flat, silent, and hungry. In 2023, New York City recorded a 42% jump in bedbug complaints. Paris, still reeling from the Olympic influx, saw cases spike by 30% in a single season. The insects did not crawl from sewers or slip through cracks. They traveled with people, hiding in luggage, coat linings, and the folds of rental mattresses. One night in a hotel, a single egg sac clings to a zipper. By morning, it is halfway across the city. Panic swept through Paris as viral videos showed bedbugs crawling on cinema seats and inside metro cars. City Hall issued public health bulletins, but the infestation outpaced every warning. In Ohio, tenants filed complaints against Clean Stay Rentals, demanding action after months of itching and sleeplessness. The Attorney General's lawsuit landed in court, and by January, Clean Stay agreed to pay $250,000 in restitution. But no payout could erase the sense of contamination. Whole apartment blocks emptied, furniture and mattresses dumped on the curb, tagged with warning signs. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid one another. Children stopped inviting friends over. Social stigma spread faster than the bugs themselves. In the hallways, tenants whispered about which unit was next. Some tried to fight back, vacuuming daily, sealing cracks with tape, laundering everything in boiling water. Others gave up, abandoning belongings they had owned for decades. The loss was not just physical. A home, once a refuge, became a place where sleep meant risk, and every itch suggested something moving beneath the skin. By the time the first bite appears, the invasion is already underway. The line between inside and outside has vanished. Tiny invaders exploit cracks and seams. Larger ones exploit something else, the warmth and shelter of the very walls meant to keep us safe. In Montana, a ceiling collapsed in 2026, sending insulation and dust across the living room. 8 garter snakes dropped through the gap, cold and silent, their den hidden beneath the foundation. Wildlife officers found they had brumated undetected, their numbers growing until a stretch of wet, warm weather drew them upward in search of food. The house, meant to keep nature out, had become a passageway, one node in a network of burrows and crawl spaces that stretched far beyond its walls. In Maryland, Jeff and Jody Brooks discovered their Annapolis home was already claimed. At night, the walls seemed to move. Rat snakes slid through the attic and crawl space, leaving shed skins in vents. The Brookses filed a $2 million lawsuit in 2015, accusing the previous owner and realtor of hiding the infestation. Legal filings described a family forced to abandon their home, its value destroyed by predators that could not be driven out. The case settled quietly, but the lesson was clear. A single hidden colony can turn a house into a trap. Santa Ana, California, saw animal control officers enter a suburban home and find hundreds of snakes, alive and dead, stuffed into ducts and closets. The smell of decay seeped through every room. Health officials ordered an evacuation. The collector who lived there was put on probation. The structure itself had become a mausoleum, its voids filled by creatures indifferent to human boundaries. Walls are not barriers, they're ecosystems. Once larger animals move in, they bring more than claws and teeth. They bring disease. A health inspector in Washington, D.C., stepped into a rental unit on M Street in June 2025 and found more than a mess. A raccoon, wild and unafraid, had torn through ceiling panels, leaving trails of urine and droppings above the tenant's bed. The apartment stank of musk and rot. The city's Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs issued a violation order that same week, mandating immediate wildlife removal and a remediation fee of $1,800. The notice was stapled to the door, but the risk did not stop at property damage. Raccoons are notorious carriers of rabies, their saliva and waste transforming once safe rooms into invisible disease zones. A single bite, a scratch, or even a hand-brushing contaminated insulation could mean a hospital visit and a series of shots. By the time the property owner complied, the animal had already shed hair and pathogens into the vents, traces that lingered long after the creature was gone. In Texas, the threat took on a commercial sheen. August 2025 brought headlines about a San Antonio event venue renting out live bats for parties. Guests posed for photos beneath fluttering wings, unaware of the risk hanging overhead. The Texas Department of State Health Services intervened on August 28th, suspending the venue's business license and issuing a public health warning. Bats, like raccoons, are efficient vectors for rabies, their guano also carrying spores that can trigger lung infections. The official notice spelled out the danger in clinical terms, but the reality was more primal, a party favor that could leave a guest fighting for their life weeks later, symptoms appearing only after the virus had taken hold. On September 7, 2025, at Grand Teton Lodge, a tourist woke to find a rat on her hand. The CDC released a rabies exposure alert, and the lodge shut down for a 2-week deep clean. Lodge staff donned gloves and masks, scrubbing every surface, sealing entry points, and sending wildlife exclusion teams into the crawl spaces. The guest received post-exposure shots at the nearest hospital. For everyone else, the knowledge lingered. The walls and ceilings that promised shelter had become reservoirs for something deadly, invisible, and persistent. Most people think that infestations come solely from the outside, but the most disturbing ones don't occupy houses, they occupy people. Rochelle Harris stepped off a plane from Peru in 2010 with a headache and a mild itch behind her ear. She chalked it up to a mosquito bite, maybe a change in climate. Days passed. The itching grew sharper, a crawling sensation beneath the skin. Doctors found nothing, just a little swelling, a touch of redness. Only when Harris heard faint popping noises inside her head did anyone look closer. The culprit, a cluster of botfly larvae, alive, feeding, their bodies moving beneath the surface. Extraction was slow. Each larva had barbed hooks anchoring it in place, resisting every tug. Rosie Broadley, returning from a rainforest trek in 2015, noticed a pimple on her scalp. It wept clear fluid, then bled. She pressed her fingers against it and felt something shift. The tiny breathing hole, barely visible, was the only clue. It took weeks before a doctor recognized the telltale sign of myiasis, a botfly larva burrowed under the skin. The removal left a crater, raw and tender, and a lingering terror of what might still be hiding deeper. Catherine Duffy, traveling through Belize in 2013, lived with a persistent boil on her arm for nearly a month. Each night, the pain sharpened, as if something inside was gnawing its way out. When the larva finally surfaced, white and wriggling, she watched it extracted with forceps, unable to look away. Abby Beckley's case in Oregon, 2016, began with a flicker in her vision. She pulled a translucent worm from her eye, then another and another. Doctors counted 14. The worms had entered unnoticed, growing and moving behind the shield of her own body. By the time the first one wriggled free, the invasion was already underway. Each story began with a minor irritation, an itch, a boil, a twinge. Each ended with the realization that something alien had been living inside, hidden in plain sight. The stories are different species, different routes, but the response is always the same. What should you do if you get infested? The first defense is attention. Droppings, scratching in the walls, unexplained bites, webs where none existed before, something that feels slightly out of place. Most infestations announce themselves quietly. The people who stop them are usually the ones who listen. The second defense is denying access. Steel mesh over vents, screens over windows, door sweeps beneath thresholds, sealed food containers, dry crawl spaces, repaired foundations. Eliminate the pathway, and most invaders never enter. The third defense is speed. Wildlife exclusion teams, exterminators, doctors, hospital treatment. The difference between inconvenience and catastrophe is often measured in hours. Delay is the ally of every infestation. The fourth defense is respect. Because rats, snakes, bats, spiders, parasites, and microbes are not evil. They are opportunists. Nature follows food, water, warmth, shelter, the same things humans seek. And when those things are available, life finds a way. Yet the goal has never been to defeat nature. That battle was lost long ago. The rats, spiders, snakes, bats, parasites, and microbes existed before us. They will exist after us. We live beside them. Always have. Always will. Home is not a fortress. It is a negotiation, a fragile agreement maintained through vigilance. And sometimes, despite every precaution, nature reminds us that the agreement is temporary. Today, more than 38 million Americans are plagued by infestations each year. Thousands more discover infestations within their own bodies. Different species, different routes, the same lesson. Something else has often already moved in. Even now, something unseen could be moving behind your walls or beneath your skin. The real horror is not what invades. It is how easily we let it in.